Yo, what's up YouTube? This is Bode Lacanian here. I am just waking up, actually, and trying to go to my affirmation board, which is OBS, and just see what inspires me for the day. And I am starting out with a reading of The Class Matrix with Vivek Chibber. I haven't read him in about a week now. And I'm also have a lot of Cassie Kozyrkov imagery on my affirmation board. Cassie Kozyrkov, she works for Google. She's a chief decision scientist there. She has a lot of really good advice, and I'm just kind of putting some of her imagery around me, because a lot of the things that people do with decision intelligence and machine learning and behavior science and psychoanalysis, they seem to all intersect in some really interesting ways. And the more I kind of put those subject matter experts and their imagery in front of me, the more I can kind of see how it intersects with a lot of other projects. So I'm just really excited to be reading Vivek Chibber with Cassie Kozyrkov watching in the background. But here is Vivek Chibber's chapter 3.7, The New Left's Folly. There is a deep and abiding irony in the research program launched by the New Left in the post-war era, of which the cultural term was the lineal descendant. Figures like Stuart Hall, some of the Frankfurt School philosophers, and cultural Gramscians understood their project to center around mending, one of the deepest lacunae in classical Marxism, its eschatological view of capitalism. As the new Left and its descendants understood it, the survival and stabilization of the system were anomalous from the standpoint of the original theory. The problem, they suggest, was that the theory was overly focused on the factors that pushed the system toward collapse, to the detriment of theorizing the sources of stabilization. This was a natural consequence of the theory's promotion of the economic structure of the contribution of culture, of the base over the superstructure, in order to understand how capitalism survived. The critical theory would have to turn to the play of cultural institutions, the role of ideology, identity, values, and so on, and so on. In making this move, the post-war theorists were actually internalizing classical Marxism's weakness, not remedying it. They were tacitly accepting the argument that the structure was the location of capitalism's destabilizing mechanisms, and that its sources of stability would therefore have to be found outside that structure. Like the classical Marxists, they refused to countenance the possibility that the class structure had a dual logic, which certainly created a social conflict, but also contained it within manageable limits. The New Left was correct in its charge that classical Marxists had paid insufficient attention to the forces that undermine class formation and thus sustained capitalism over time. But in the end, the program they launched had the same effect. In an important respect, in spite of their identification as mavericks, as theorists breaking out of orthodoxy, they operated within the foundational assumptions of the theory they were criticizing. The argument I have offered, I being Vivek, the argument Vivek has offered in this chapter departs from the culturalist program in two ways. First, it suggests that the real source of capitalist instability is the class structure itself. From this follows the second and more portentous point, that far from careening toward imminent collapse, capitalism underwrites its own stability. I wonder if I can highlight it. I can't highlight it. Capitalism underwrites its own stability. I just like that phrase. This conclusion flows naturally from the premise that capitalism distributes class capacities unequally between employers and employees. If this is so, then even while it generates antagonism and conflict between them, the conflict will tend to be resolved in favor of employers. Since the path to capitalism's supersession runs through class formation, and since the odds are stacked against the latter, it follows that the system will tend to steer class antagonism toward a form that is manageable and keep its intensity within an acceptable range, thereby maintaining stable reproduction. This is built into the structure itself and is not the product of the ruling group's cultural agency. The New Left was therefore right in thinking that classical Marxists had not adequately theorized the sources of stability in capitalism, but the problem was that the classical tradition had not developed the implications of their own theory. In failing to recognize this, and thereby seeking the resolution to the problem in its cultural domain, the post-war theorists not only were led down a dubious intellectual path, but missed an opportunity to develop their very research program to which they professed fidelity. Yeah, that was a short chapter, so, which is good, because I'm just waking up and just trying to get into this daily, day-to-day habit of reading either an article or wisdom from, a subject matter expert, or a chapter of a book, such as The Class Matrix. So, thank you, Dr. Vivek Chibber, for being an inspiration, and thank you, Dr. Cassie Kozyrkov, for letting me use your image out of context for a chapter in Vivek Chibber's The Class Matrix. Eliminate unfruitful approaches. That seems kind of relevant to some of the things that Vivek was saying about the new left and their approaches. But it's a good thing that things are changing and new approaches are always looked at, because it is important to remove unfruitful approaches.